Nisi wants to know whether there's a relationship between Zelensky and Soros, or Soros's role in Ukraine.
Yeah, so I think he began the soft power color revolution operations even in the late 80s in the Ukraine, and then into the 90s. And the reason that it was that early is that they wanted, after the Cold War, to make sure that those Eastern European countries, the Eastern Bloc, could be transitioned into the Western financial model. And one of the global elite books that we just recently covered was Jacques Attali, who's the Kissinger of France. He's the sort of the mentor to various French presidents. Attali was in charge of the European banking structure, integrating the post-Cold War Eastern Bloc countries into the EU banking structure. And they wanted to make sure that they could immediately get those countries into IMF debt, you see. And so that was a very key role there. So that's why they had to start so early in making sure that Ukraine, when they started having elections, didn't get people elected who were, favorable to Putin or to Russia. So that began in the 80s and 90s. Even Reagan, Reagan was involved in privatizing the intelligence, the stuff that the CIA used to do, and putting it under humanitarian aid cover. So a lot of that stuff with USAID being fronts, being shells, a lot of the operations that we're talking about today, including Ukraine, were run out, and Serbia as well, by the way. Serbia was, when they took down Milosevic, it was the exact same operation. They used the cutout, which was called the OSCE, Organization for Security Cooperation in Europe. And the OSCE was basically just packed with British intelligence, CIA, US naval intelligence, all these, operatives essentially for NATO, to ensure that they could take down, in Serbia in 2000, it was the people power color revolution. In Ukraine, it was the orange revolution. So it's all the same structure and model.
Right, I've got a heavy question for you here, Jay. Let's see. From Hushed Tones. How has the Enlightenment trapped both ends of the political spectrum into a crap paradigm? Progressives want a revolution. Dispensational evangelical want the end times. Is this a coincidence?
I think that the best way to understand this in our day is the model of a circle of acceptable political or social discourse. So what the social engineers and the power structure does is they make sure that you only ask questions or discuss topics within a circle. Anything outside of that circle is considered not even a valid question. There's actual studies on this. I did a podcast with a guy that used to consult at I think the Defense Department, and he did a whole lecture on this about how the media control works. So any question, like if you were to say question the Enlightenment, that would be a question outside of the circle. It's not even a allowable, relevant question. So it's a very tightly controlled discourse and dialectic that's allowed in the media. And I think dispensational evangelical end time stuff is just another one of these control positions that makes you useless, ineffective, and an idiot, basically. All of that stuff, by the way, was set up by foreign PACs and their funding, shall we say, in America, to get people to default to worshiping certain places in the Middle East, if you understand what I'm saying.
Of course. Why is Trump against hardworking federal workers who are not a part of the deep state? That's from Tashel.
I don't know if maybe she's not in America, or maybe she's, not understanding how the deep state bureaucracy works. It's nothing to do with picking out people who are hardworking. It's rather that there has been a security state establishment that's a breakaway establishment that kind of works as a shadow government within the U.S. government. So this is what really runs the country, and they're directly sort of subservient to people above them that are committed to the globalist projects. So that model is actually the model that the British Empire itself set up for itself, with this inner circle that would run things, Cecil Rhodes, etc., Rothschild Milner Circle. And then they had a society of helpers, which was about 6,000 or so academics, people in media, people in business, who were true believers in the faux democracy that the people in this inner structure promoted. And so the same model was set up in America through Pratt House and through CFR, all that kind of stuff. So a lot of the people that you're talking about, they actually are not, they may be good intention and they may be hard workers, but they're working for institutions that actually undermine the US and national sovereignty.
Yeah, a lot of good people are in organizations that have been co-opted by the vested interests. So Uber Fuba, do you think Gulf War I was about oil, or do you think they really believed he had weapons of mass destruction?
Funny you said this, because I just read in a, so the two official historians of British intelligence history, Andrews and Green, they wrote a giant book, which, by the way, came out about 10 years after my book. Their book is about spies in entertainment and spies in Hollywood. And towards the end of the book, they have a chapter on the guy who invented, you got to hear this, Sean. You're not going to believe this, but I'll show you the book if you don't believe me. So this is the official British intelligence history guys talking about spies in movies and spies in entertainment, right? These are the guys that wrote the official history of MI5, MI6, okay? The last chapter of the book, towards the end, it talks about the guy who came up with the weapons of mass destruction stuff about Saddam. I forget his name. It's some kind of weird code name. Well, they eventually figured out who he was. And guess where he came up with the fake intelligence for the deadly gas that Saddam was storing?
Was it Israel?
No. It's from a movie. It's
Mm.
purely invented. Okay. It's The Rock with Nicolas Cage and Sean Connery. And at the end of the movie, when Nicolas Cage has those giant green balls of gas, that's literally where the guy got it from. And he put that out as intel. Saddam is collecting these balls of deadly gas. And so this is the admission of the establishment telling you this. This is how stupid they think everybody is. They can take stuff from a 1997 movie, put it out as weapons of mass destruction intelligence. Everybody believes it because they've been propagandized by the movies to believe it. And then they can say 25 years later, yeah, that was from a movie and you all believed it.
And they made billions, trillions of taxpayers' money. All right, I'm an American too, and definitely not Israeli. So why are we funding Israel's existence?
I have 2 talks on my channel that go pretty deep into the history of this. This is a really complex, it goes back to the British Empire. And there were famous British spies who were sent out by the British Empire at the turn of the last century to scout for oil. And this is people like St. John Philby, Gertrude Bell, T.E. Lawrence. There's a whole host of these, right? And it's not just the British, the French, Americans, and Russia. They were all sending spies into the Middle East because this is right when people were figuring out that there was oil. So a lot of it it's not just Gulf War. All of that region has to do with what they call black gold. And so there's a great book by a French intelligence historian, Gals Mounier. He wrote a book called Black Gold Spies, and we just reviewed that on my channel. That will tell you the history of the whole Middle East, including the nation state of Israel being set up, Balfour Declaration, etc. So it goes back to the British Empire. And then when America kind of inherited the old British imperial world control, the Pax Americana, America was in this position where they wanted to have an outpost in the Middle East that was on their side, that they could kind of have an alliance with there as a beachhead against other countries that in World War I, World War II, and then the Cold War. So there's a long history as to why the U.S. does that, but it goes even deeper as we get into the modern period when Israel has a lot of power and a lot of influence.
Right, we've got 10 minutes left, folks, with Jay. Please get your questions into the chat.
Could I recommend a movie on that too, by the way, which
Yes.
I just watched the movie. I could not believe how it was pretty plausible. There's a movie with John Hamm and Rosamund Pike called Beirut, and it's about CIA station in Lebanon. And the movie is actually a really fair portrayal of all sides of Middle Eastern conflicts, whether it's the CIA, whether it's Israel, whether it's Hezbollah, PLO. It shows the complexity of the region, the history, and it was actually pretty well done.
Erie wants to know the name of the book you were describing. He or she missed it.
Which book?
The previous book you were referencing.
There's a book that a French intelligence historian guy wrote called Black Gold Spies, and his name is Gals Munier, Munier. So I assume he means that book.
What does Jay think about NDEX, a file generated by local PD that can be viewed by all law enforcement throughout the country? I've never heard of that.
A local police department? I don't know what it is either.
All right. Is Zelensky going to get overthrown in his country?
I don't know how that would play out. I don't know if there would be an overthrow. I think they would probably the West will probably the U.S. will just force him into some kind of deal, I would assume. I don't know about overthrown.
Will it lead to World War III or the end of civilization, i.e. nuclear escalation?
Well, I think that's one of the concerns, is that that's the card that the Western Atlantis' superstructure might play. Seems like, Zelensky immediately flew to London after the Trump meeting. And so the goblins have, sort of converged from Europe over there where you guys are, to try to strategize what to do now if they lose the support of Trump and the State Department and the CIA and all that. So it could be a route they are forced to go. I hope not.
Sky Spirit wants to know if you think that one big player set the Ukraine war up, and if that player could be the CIA.
Oh yeah, I don't think there's any question. Yeah.
Can you explain the Freemason symbols?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of them. So, if you get like Alfred McCoy has a dictionary of Freemasonry, and he'll go through hundreds of Freemasonic images and symbols, but everything from the bee and the beehive to kind of a top-down control to the square and the compass being sort of the generative principle. Sometimes they put the G in the center for that the masculine male phallus is what generates life, but also that the square and the compass signify the great architect of the universe working with eternal matter. This is an old Aristotelian position. I mean, there's a million Freemasonic symbols, so it just depends on which one.
Have you heard of the Seven Sisters Alliance in the oil industry?
Yeah, this was a big part of what happened in Iran. So the first successful CIA regime change coup operation was the toppling of Mossadegh to install the Shah, and that was run by Kermit Roosevelt. It was a really elaborate, initially unsuccessful CIA operation, but then Kermit Roosevelt chose to stay there, try it again, and through the original sort of regime, the soft power student revolution, pushing that kind of stuff consistently in the universities amongst the youth, it was successful. So it's kind of the first proto color revolution that actually turned into a real revolution. And that partly was because Britain and the West and America wanted oil. They did not want the oil in Iran nationalized. They wanted a deal where BP could have a certain cut, Iran could have a cut, and America could have a cut. And so this leads to what we know as Seven Sisters.
How is fiat money actually created?
It's kind of a complicated process, but the basics are just that they issue an amount of fiat currency that then they immediately allow the government to buy. The private banks are issuing it, and then the government buys it through bonds, or they basically just sell the debt to their cronies. The cronies can then use the debt and use the fiat money to buy up real world assets. So that's the basics of it.
Right. There was. Have you watched The Agency on NF about wayward CIA agent and CIA London station Ron Burkle of Soho House fame, executive producers?
I haven't. I mean, there's a ton of like, Hollywood and British, spy shows. I haven't watched Spooks. I haven't watched MI5. I did interview many years ago. One of my first interviews was Annie Michonne, who was a former British intelligence, who was a consultant on either Spooks or MI5, I forget which show. But I haven't seen this one. So there's a million of these. I haven't seen them all.
Will Diddy be unalived?
I mean, if he's involved in a situation that's like a mini sort of Epstein thing, it's absolutely a real possibility.
Yeah, definitely. It depends how high it goes, doesn't it?
Right, exactly.
Right, let me see. We're into the last 5 minutes, folks. Last few minutes. Do you know anything about the Pope opening sacred portals?
I think these are just more symbolic doorways. If you go to the Vatican, if you do a tour or walk through, we did this last year. I'd never been there until last year. There's all kinds of sort of symbolic alcoves and side chapels, and there's all sorts of things the Pope does with sort of local Vatican adjacent traditions. So I don't see much. There wasn't much significance in my view of him opening these doors.
Do you believe Heather O'Rourke passed due to Crohn's or more nefarious causes?
So I actually had not looked into this until pretty recently, and it seems like the main questioning comes from the lack of concern about her medical issue, and then of all people, it's Harry Winkler. It's the Fonz, the Winkler, who was the main proponent of the idea that she had been abused. And if I recall, he said something like, "Oh, I worked with her on some show or film, and my suspicion was that she was abused." So the family still maintains, the sister and the parents, they still maintain that there was no abuse. But I don't know. I could see it being either way.
Can you break down how USAID promotes and liberalization of churches and why it's bad and why we should go? How do I pronounce that one?
Ecumenism.
Ecumenism
is the idea that we need to promote and push the sort of merging of all the religions. All the religions kind of believe and have the same ideas. So why don't we promote through CIA money, USAID money, entities and organizations that favor the blending together of all the religions, and especially within the various Christian sects and denominations. Yeah, so one of the things that came out was tens of millions of dollars given to the most liberal versions of Protestant churches. I'm sure USAID was involved in the Catholic open borders human trafficking stuff as well. And it's a way for the U.S. to push what it calls soft power or culture war in religious circles as well. So if you're thinking about yourself as the state, as the government, you don't want to just push military kinetic warfare power. You also want to project power through your culture, your economy, your education. All of those things become forms of soft power. And USAID was one of these key ways that they funneled money. I mean, it's money laundering too, but they also did put the money into projects that could promote Americanism. So it's just, if you understand soft power, read Joseph Nye's famous essay, Soft Power, and it will tell you why they do that and how they do it.
So now the funding has been cut off for USAID. Are you seeing any consequences of that in America?
I missed that first part. What'd you say?
Now that the funding has been cut off for USAID, are you seeing any results of that in America?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of that stuff is used for foreign operations, although some of it is domestic too. I think the effects will probably be seen down the road as some of the institutions that were funded kind of go away. So I don't think we've immediately seen all of those institutions fizzling out, but I definitely think we will.
Got a really highbrow question here, Jay. You're gonna have to draw on all your knowledge for this one. From Starduster. Can you do a freestyle rap about Sean?
I'll have to find a beat and I'll try to think up something. Yeah,
pull some lines from Sons of Ecstasy. Have you seen recent reporting that Donbass, Russia region has more minerals than the US needs?
I don't know about than the US needs, but I mean, I assumed kind of all along that there would be some attempt to, go after the resources. It's a mineral rich, resource rich region. And back in say 2012 or whenever Brzezinski's last book came out, called Strategic Vision. I read that when I was a research assistant. I was just sitting there at the college library desk and reading Brzezinski, and he had a whole section on Ukraine and what the West would plan to do with Ukraine, which kind of tells me that all this was planned because he talked about it before all this happened. It was before everything popped off in 2014. So, it was obviously well planned in advance, and it's all kinds of stuff. It's not just minerals, it's a strategic location in terms of Russia, it's human trafficking. People overlook this kind of stuff going on there too.
Yeah, so put one in the chat, folks, if you think Keir Starmer's sending UK troops to die in the meat grinder because he cares about the people of Ukraine. Put a 2 in the chat if you think Keir Starmer's sending UK troops to die in the meat grinder because he's got a side deal with Zelensky and he's making a play on the minerals. All right, we are at time, my friend. Thank you so much for coming on. Absolutely brilliant as usual. We've got through nearly all of the questions. Is there anything you'd like to say to the viewers in conclusion? What can they look forward to on your platforms?
Yeah, thank you for having me again, Sean. It's always a pleasure talking to you. Really enjoyed the documentary with you and Sammy. I watched that with my wife the other night. We had a good time watching that. Yeah, I mean, what's coming up, I guess we're going to be doing more geopolitical lectures. I think we're going to do a book probably for members on the history of the Mossad. It's a famous book called By Way of Deception by Viktor Ostrovsky. So we'll probably be talking about that because a lot of people don't know that. It's a very well-known text. Thank you for your audience, for your questions today. Great stuff. But you can follow me over on Twitter. You can follow me on YouTube and all the outlets under my name.
Oh, thanks, man. I'll let you go. I'm going to close the show. So have a great rest of your day, my friend. Take care.
Thanks, man.